Hey everybody, Randy Patterson here with Boomerosity. We cover all sorts of people, all sorts of genres, and I would even say both um, genders. I know there's all sorts of other genders, but I think the roots kind of boil down to the two. At least I'm old fashioned. I guess that's where I'm at. But so two genders plus all the others. Let's put it that way. But I think it's safe to say that up until now, up until recent years, it's been a man or woman world in rock and roll. And there's been a glass ceiling there for women to try to break through. And it's unfortunate that it's been that way. It's certainly not right. And I would dare say that women have always had to work a lot harder to accomplish half as many of the rewards that men have had to do. I'm not saying that in a patronizing way, but it's just, I think, a historic fact. So there's a book that has come out called She's a Badass, and it's written by renowned journalist, rock journalist, I might add, Katherine Yeske Taylor. And I got to talk to her about this book that just came out about a week or so ago. It's late January as I record this. And the book is fascinating, extremely well documented. It's journalism the way it was supposed to be, and that's well documented, unbiased, at least from the writer's perspective, and very well written. Golly, I mean, this is one of those kind of books you just love writing because you love seeing great journalism in action. And Katherine has done an amazing job on this book. It's her first book. But believe me, this woman knows her stuff. She knows what she's doing. She does it right. And it's well represented in this book. So I'd encourage you to get it. You can look on the Boomerosity page that this interview is nested in, and you can click on there to order the book. And I recommend that you do it and add it to your personal library. So, she interviews a lot of people across all different genres of music, across several generations. And it's very insightful. It's very hard hitting. It's very unvarnished, in my opinion. So definitely worth adding to your library. If you would, please share this interview with your friends that are interested in these kind of things. I'm sure there's a lot of them out there. Also, if you would, just like it and subscribe to whatever venue you're watching or listening to this through, because it helps us. So I would greatly appreciate it. So without any further ado, here's my first interview with Katherine Yeske Taylor. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson. Take care. Hello, Katherine. How you doing?
Good.
Well, thank you for taking the time. And I've got to tell you, man, I love this book. I commend you. Is it your first book you've written?
It is, yes. And I wasn't even expecting to write a book. It
Really?
actually kind of fell in my lap.
What brought it on?
Well, I mean, I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. And I think as a journalist, you always have in the back of your mind that writing a book is the thing that you want to do, the ultimate thing. And but I just never, it seemed kind of daunting. I didn't know how to start figuring out how to do it. I just was busy, life gets in the way. And then one day I got a call from a literary agent out of the blue saying, I've been reading your articles and I think that you would be a great author. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And we started talking, and he really liked an interview I had done with Danita Sparks of L7.
Mm-hmm.
And so that prompted him to say, well, maybe you should write a book about women in rock and feminism. And as soon as he said it, I knew I could fill out a whole book with that topic, no problem.
What made you feel that? I mean, from your experiences, as a backdrop, what made you think, well, heck yeah, I can do this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I've probably done thousands of interviews at this point. And it hasn't been uncommon when I've talked to women that they would tell me stories of something that had happened when they were on the road, some guy treating them badly, or maybe even feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
And so over the years, I had just I kept hearing these stories, not all the time. It's not like people would get on and vent with me every time, but enough where I knew this kind of bad treatment was still happening to a certain extent. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk to people from across generations and find out, is it getting any better? I know it's still happening to a certain degree, but is it at least getting better? And I'm happy to say that it is. Some work still needs to be done.
Right.
But for the most part, the women that I talk to who are starting off now do seem to have it quite a bit easier than the women who started off in the 70s and early 80s that I talked to for this book.
Do you feel like the advent of the Me Too movement, with all those stories beginning to percolate to the surface, was your book already written by the time that started coming out, like the Bill Cosby thing and all that kind of stuff? Or was that
It was
after?
simultaneous with that, but I have to say that the Me Too thing didn't really have the kind of watershed moment type of thing that I thought it might when it first started.
Really interesting.
Yeah. It seems much more that there was a turning point with the women in this book, anyway, in the late 80s and early 90s with the Riot Girl movement. That seems to have made more of a difference, at least for musicians.
Yeah, yeah. Was
So
Go
I
ahead.
hope that maybe people will kind of read this book and maybe they'll agree with that assessment. Maybe they won't. I hope this book will spark a lot of conversations about things like that.
Well, I think it probably already has, don't you? I mean, it's I know it with me, I mean, I'm probably a bit older than you. I'm 64. And, here's what I don't understand, Catherine, and I'd be really love to hear your take on this. You know, I was in grade school. We heard about treating people equally and fairly, regardless of race, sex, whatever. It was beat into our heads in school. We go to college, it's the same thing. We go to the workplace, it's the same thing. The entertainment business, if anything, has been used to help promote equality, I would think, and justice and things of that nature. Why in the world is it all these years later? I mean, we can go all the way back to the suffragette movement before our times, our grandparents' time, and
Yeah.
that was being talked about then. We heard about the casting couch in Hollywood, all those
Mhm.
kinds of things. Why are we still having this conversation? Why is this stuff still going on? What do you have any thoughts
Well,
as
this
to
is
why
why
that's going
I
on?
specifically chose rock music for this book, because I think it isn't going on as much in other genres. I do interviews across a wide variety of musical styles, and it seems much more equal when I talk to women in country music, when I talk to women in pop, hip hop. When you turn on radio stations or go to Spotify, curated stations for those kinds of musical styles, you hear many more women than you do when you turn on a rock station.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the reason why I wanted to focus on this book, is because I thought, well, why is that? I mean, I don't know. I still am not sure that I have a really good answer for you on that. It might be because rock has historically been so testosterone driven. It's kind of
Very
been this boys
Neanderthal.
club kind of thing. Yeah. And I wonder if that's maybe part of it, where people say, well, women can't just rock as hard because, the testosterone thing. And these women definitely refute that. I mean, L7 and Bikini Kill, I think, are just as hard edged as any all male band.
Well,
So,
good night. Even in our, going back to early rock, and you have, a Janis Joplin, who can keep up with that?
mhm,
There's the women are, out there. She set that bar very, very high.
yeah.
But
In
yet,
general, though, I think the music business just has been a male-dominated system from the start, and it's just been hard to kind of wrest that power out of this smaller group of people.
Mhm.
I think it's changing. When I talk to other music journalists who are coming up through the ranks, they have it better, than I. I talk about this in my intro about how I encountered some of the same things that the women in this book talk about in terms of men not wanting me to be in their club. The older male journalist in Atlanta where I came up, most of them were cool, but there were a couple who made sure to corner me at the nightclubs and say some pretty terrible things that I did not deserve.
Right.
So I just think that women coming up through the ranks might be threatening to a certain kind of guy who has had kind of power and control just by virtue of being a guy up until now, hasn't really had to prove himself as much. And I really want to make sure, though, that people understand that this is a really small group of men, I think, then and now, really, because as you said, people have grown up for decades now hearing that we're equal. Um, this is not a male bashing book. The
And I
woman
didn't
that
take it as that way. I'm sorry if I come across that way. No, not
no,
at
I just
all.
want to make sure that people really understand that it's not bitter. Um, these women all, without me having to prompt them, mentioned stories of men who had given them significant help.
Hmm.
Um, so we're really just talking about a very small but kind of very visible group of men who have done their best to kind of prevent women over the years from having the same kind of opportunities as their male peers.
My career was predominantly in high tech, and it's interesting to me that even there, still in this day and age, you could still see that kind of Neanderthalism. Fortunately for me, I worked for a lot of women in that industry, so I was able, I had never had a problem with it. And I'm not saying that to patronize you, but it's, to me, it's just still kind of remarkable that this kind of stuff still goes on. That there is, I mean, I've talked to women in country music, and they still feel like there's still a bit of a glass ceiling. I mean, I think we're seeing it, go away a bit, but there still seems to be that limit.
Yeah,
You don't
I
want
think
too many
no genre
women,
is
whatever.
totally equal now. That's true.
Yeah, yeah,
Some are better than others. Like I said, I think rock is kind of lagging behind, and hence my focusing on it for
right.
this.
When you started out with writing the book, what were your expectations? What did you think that the outcome might look like versus how it turned out? And were there any surprises in there as you were going along through this book?
Oh yeah, definitely there were surprises, but good ones. When I first got this book deal and I sat down with the people at the publishing company, we were very concerned before I started doing any of these interviews that I might run into a problem of having every chapter seem kind of samey,
Hmm.
like everything would kind of get repetitive. It would be the same kind of story over and over again. And they said, well, we don't know how you're going to do it, but, try to make sure that doesn't happen. And I was worried because I thought, how I know I can't put words in people's mouths. I can't. I'm a journalist. I sit back and let people tell their stories, and then I tell their truths. I'm supposed to be a conduit. I'm not supposed to be steering this. So
Right.
I was worried. But quickly, it turned out that that was not going to be a problem at all because these women are all so different and they have such different takes on the experiences that they've had. They even differ on their opinion about the word feminism, whether they want to be called a feminist or not. There's a certain number of women in this book who say, don't call me that. I don't want to be called it. And I was actually surprised because I had the title for this book picked out when I started. And I thought that anybody who signed on to do a book where the subtitle was Women in Rock Shaping Feminism would be a feminist, would be willing to call herself that. And that's not the case. Some of the women in this book say that they feel that certain women's movements have gone too far. Things have gotten too extreme. They feel that the word feminist has a negative connotation because of that. And
Mhm.
so they still believe in women's equality. They still believe in the underlying idea, that feminism began as, but they disagree with the way that the approach has evolved. So that was really interesting. And that immediately really made everybody quite different.
Huh, interesting. But you did say that there was, well, I think I read one part in your book. Well, let me put it this way. What common threads do you see from generation to generation and genre to genre? Are there any common threads that you discovered in all your
Yeah.
interviews and such?
Yeah. Everybody had totally different backgrounds. And these women have pretty different musical styles within the rock genre. There's everything from really, mainstream music such as Ann Wilson of Heart, Gina Shock of the Go-Go's, and then there's really subversive kind of music such as Lydia Lunch and Bikini Kill.
Mhm.
But all the women, regardless of their background or styles, had two things in common, really, that I could tell. First of all, they were persistent. No matter what happened to them, they kind of brushed themselves off and got back up and kept going, no matter
Mhm.
what happened to them. And then the other thing was they had thick skin. They some of them had absolutely horrific things happen to them, and I think it would have been really easy to say, "That's it. I'm out. I can't do this anymore." But these women seem to take it almost like a challenge, like, "Oh, that's how you're gonna treat me? Well, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna show you that you're not going to beat me. I'm going to be strong and I'm going to succeed." And
Mhm.
so those two things, all the women in this book had, regardless of the kind of person they are, the kind of music they play.
You made a comment that I find very interesting, and I thought it maybe I was just viewing things wrong as I view the cultural landscape and the causes that we see on TV and in print, online, et cetera. But like I said, I'm old enough to remember when Dr. King was assassinated and RFK. I even vaguely remember JFK, although it's just very vaguely. But there's all these, I remember how impressionable those events were to me as a kid and as the causes were. I didn't come from a family of privilege, but I obviously came from a little bit better situation than, say, the people in the Black community did, and things like that. But I have noticed that even with the just causes, whether it's feminism, racism, whatever the case may be, it seems like the messaging, the the approaches that they're taking to combat it maybe has changed. Maybe the cause has been redefined. And it sounds like the women you talk to, some of them,
Mhm.
I find that remarkable because it's almost like I could see where maybe somebody in the younger groups that are considering themselves activists for women's causes might consider that to be a little more, I hate to say it, but maybe right leaning versus left, if it's either one. But to say, hey, this thing has gotten out of hand, this thing has gotten out of control beyond what we were saying the objectives were. I mean, talk a little more about that because I find that fascinating.
Well, I wouldn't say that it was one generation or another that expressed this opinion that they didn't really want to be labeled as a feminist. I found that I encountered someone like that in each of the generations that I interviewed. For example, the older women in the book, such as Cherie Curry, who really came of age in the 70s, and same thing with Exene Cervenka of X. Um, they both felt that the women's movements just really didn't represent their own opinions. But then when I talked to some of the younger artists, such as Orianthi or Bonnie Bloomgarden of Death Valley Girls,
Mm-hmm.
they just didn't want a label applied to them really at all. Like Bonnie's really interesting because she would talk about how even as a kid, growing up in the 80s and 90s, she felt conflicted even being labeled as female, not just feminist, but female, because she just didn't feel that she fit into that kind of into that box. That we have male, we have female, and of course, that's a whole debate that's getting a lot of attention these days about
Mm-hmm.
transgender and how gender people believe is on a spectrum, and people's arguments about that. So that's probably, I didn't delve into that hugely with her because that's kind of beyond the scope of this particular book. But I would like to see someone take that idea and run with it and say, like, well, how about gender in general, overall, just as an overarching concept? How does that impact things? Amy Ray, same thing. she said all her life she's felt split down the middle between feeling male and female, and it's just not acceptable in today's society. And she talks a lot about the difficulties she's encountered because of that.
Mhm.
So it's interesting because I wouldn't really say that there was one opinion about feminism or gender or anything really that I noticed was really okay. All the older people believe this, and all the younger people believe this other thing. It wasn't really like that. It was more that um, people's individual experiences had shaped them in different ways. So um, some older people agreed with some of the younger people, and it just really was an interesting cross section of people. People are really very different. That's what I really came across with this, is
Like
that
herding
how
cats,
different
isn't it?
people are. Yeah, people keep asking me if I'm going to do a second volume because they think there might be so much more out there, though. But here's the interesting thing is when I kind of got up to the 15th, 16th, 17th interview for this book, I started hearing the same kind of experiences and opinions again,
Uh,
which to me kind of tells me that I captured
It captures the
the
span of it.
gamut.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way to capture every single opinion and experience under the sun, but that told me that I um, was on the right track in terms of getting a broad enough range.
You know, you said something in the book. I didn't write it down verbatim, but I think it was in the context of what some of the artists have said. And that was that some of the women, and you touched on it just now, that about not wanting to be identified as a female rocker or anything like that. Maybe I'm old fashioned. I don't like to think I'm sexist in any way, but to me, I think there's something refreshing to be able to say, not as a poster child or a token act of anything. To me, I think it's remarkable. I mean, to put Orianthi against, I'd put her against any guitarist in rock and roll. I mean,
Yeah.
she could be, you know, she could be nothing as sexually or as a sex. You could be male, female, or, neutral, whatever, non-binary. And I wouldn't care. I would want to hear her play, you
Yeah, but I
know?
do remember when she was hired as the first female band member in Alice Cooper's band, and it was just relentless, woman guitar player, everybody had to point that out. And I guess I see both sides. I see, yes, you're right. It is frustrating. Like, why can't you just be a guitarist? But on the other hand, I did think that it was significant that she was the first female band member for someone who is so legendary. And I was hoping that other legendary figures would take note, because there's still a number of men in their 60s, 70s, 80s who are still active musicians who've never had a woman in their band. And I would like to see that change. So I can really I see the frustration, but I also see the importance of celebrating when someone does make it clear that they don't care if someone's male or female. They're going to hire them because they're the best one for the job.
Exactly. And that was my point. Cause you know, let me shift it to race. I, I find that when I have friends of whatever race, and even women, just so you can either make it about race or of sex, when they're my friends, when we're in that same circle, I don't look at them and go, oh, there's Jerry, my Mexican friend, or
Right.
there, is Ron, my black friend. I'm looking at, there's my friend, man. I'm glad to see my friend.
Right.
I'm glad to see Paula, my friend. I don't, the peripheral labels don't kick in. That I
Right.
don't see the tokenism in that. To me, it's almost like a Martin Luther King thing. We just see humans
Mm.
at that point. Now, is there a danger in that we water down the significance of the race or the gender? I don't think that'd happen. I think if anything, we're seeing a lot of that at risk today with some of the other stuff going on. But I personally feel like it'd be cool to be able to say, oh, there's the Alice Cooper band, and oh gosh, there's, Nita Ford's back with them. Very cool, But I don't think in terms of women. I think in terms of somebody can really kick butt on the guitar,
Yeah, I
and I
think most
would,
people do think that way, but not all. And so
yeah,
like I said earlier, we're kind of talking about a certain subset of people who are kind of stubbornly clinging to what I think of as kind of outdated notions.
boards.
It was
Yeah.
interesting because when I talked to women for this book, sometimes they would tell me a story of somebody treating them badly, and I would have the question, well, how do you know that that was because you were female? How do you know that promoter wasn't just a jerk who would be this way to any
Anybody, yeah,
artist? So it was interesting to hear sometimes how they did know, in fact, because they would say something derogatory that was specifically, female related, comments on their anatomy, would get physically intimidating with them in a way that probably wouldn't happen with a guy who's their size. Amy Ray has a pretty memorable story about a promoter being threatening with her, like hitting his hand with like a baseball bat, making it clear that he, wasn't going to pay her what they were owed for the night. And she just had to leave without the payment because she knew she was outmatched that way. I mean, there is a certain reality that women are more vulnerable, especially as touring musicians, because we do tend to be smaller and not as physically strong. And so I
yeah,
think there are some people who do take advantage of that difference. So it was interesting though to hear, because there were some stories that people told me that I didn't put in the book because I wasn't sure. I couldn't buy that they were definitely because of a gender related issue.
gotcha. So what's the feedback been so far?
Oh,
Now that
it's been really great. It's been out for a week now as we're speaking, and thanks to pre-sales, it already sold out its first run, and we have a second print
Congratulations.
run going right now. Yeah, so that's a really good sign. It's gotten really good reviews so far. I see the women who I interviewed for the book have been starting to post about it and tell people about it, which is important,
I was
and that
going to
makes
ask
me
you
feel
about that.
good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Very nice.
There were a couple of women who told me stories. They said, I never really talked about this publicly before. So I feel very honored that people were really willing to dive so deep with me in this, because each chapter is about 4,000 words, which is much longer than even your standard magazine cover story. So this
Right.
was a real opportunity to tell their life story in a way that I think was unique to a lot of them. They'd never had a chance to do anything quite like this before. And beyond the feminism angle, I thought it was just interesting to dive into their life story that deep,
I
just in
agree.
general.
You did that so very well. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, because if anything, I mean, all the interviews you've done, all the articles you've done, I mean, you're light years ahead of, you've probably forgotten more than I'll ever know about this business. I've only been doing this as a passion for 15 years. And I've had maybe 500 interviews, and you've got, multiples of that. So first of all, I learned from you, from your book, and that was, I want to thank you for that, for being, for being that kind of influence on there. And but to that point, I want to shift gears a little bit from the book into rock journalism in general. What are the best and worst changes you've seen in rock journalism in all its various forms? And what do you think the state of rock journalism is today? What's your view of that?
I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, I know people are really down this week because of what's gone on with Pitchfork, and there's always major magazines even folding, and that's been that way for the 3+ decades that I have done this. It's an unfortunate truth of this business that it's very fickle. Things come and go, but as long as there are music fans, there's always going to be people who want to read music journalism. And I just don't think that it's going to go extinct anytime soon. I mean, I keep reading about how it's a dying art form. I just don't believe that's true. Now, what I do see changing is that it's a harder art form to make a living at doing. Because the pay has gone down significantly. You know, there used to be only a limited number of outlets out there before the internet, and so they paid decently. Now anybody can say, I want to be a music journalist. You can start your own blog. You can get on the internet and do it for
Yeah.
free.
Yep.
And that's great in a way, but it also means that people don't have to be paid as well because, the powers that be realize I don't have to pay people $200 for an article if there's someone over here who's willing to do it for free.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same problem that's facing musicians right now, too, where, you used to have to get a record deal. And it's kind of a gatekeeping system where most people couldn't get their music out there to the masses unless they had a record deal and the distribution that came with it. Now anybody can put their music on Spotify or YouTube or wherever. And on the one hand, that's great. It means that more people can express themselves and have a shot, but it also means there's so much out there that it's actually harder to do it in some ways.
I agree. I think whether it's in the magazines or the papers, even, regular small town newspapers, whatever the case may be, I think there's been too much centralization of it. And a good friend of mine, Rob Shanahan, he's Ringo Starr's photographer, and he's shot a lot of pictures. I remember 10 or so years ago, we were talking, and he had a great picture of Paul and Ringo together that was brand new. And Rolling Stone magazine contacted him, and they said, we'd like to use that picture. And he said, okay. And they said, well, it'll be $100. And he's like, I don't need $100 that bad, an iconic photo, and so whether it's writers, and I want to be clear. I consider some people call me a journalist. I'm not a journalist. I'm a fan who happens to write and can interview and have a decent track record of it. Not anywhere near like yours, but one I can be kind of proud of, but it's, you're right. It's gotten so segmented. It's gotten so granular now. It, makes it, it has commoditized. It's kind of cheapened the value of what is produced and put out there, and makes it harder to rise above the noise.
Also, I think, and I don't mean this to sound snobby, but I do sometimes get frustrated because there is a difference between someone who is a journalist and someone who is a blogger who is untrained. I actually have a journalism degree, and I worked really hard to get it. And it does make a difference. It means that I was trained in ethics. It means that I was trained rigorously in how to do proper research. It means that I was trained in how to be objective, and let the subjects shine through without imposing my own opinion on it. And this is something that kind of frustrates me when I see bloggers who maybe don't have that kind of training. They put themselves in it a lot. Maybe I think sometimes too much. You don't need to say, I was sitting with so-and-so. We know you were there because you're doing this article. It's kind of like, reminds me of when I look up a recipe and there's something where somebody writes 10 pages about why they love this recipe and how their grandmother gave it to them. That's wonderful and all, but I'm always jump to recipe.
Show me the banana pudding.
Right. And so I do get kind of frustrated because sometimes when people kind of sling criticism at me as a journalist, they're not really criticizing journalism. They're criticizing something they've read that is in fact not journalism.
Yeah.
So that's maybe my one criticism.
Too, I would say, and again, this is not to patronize you, Katherine, but everything you said resonates with me as far as ethics, as far as research methods, getting to the facts. That's, I think, a novel concept these days, because I'll be so bold as to say, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of bloggers on there that I'm surprised, doing what I do, I put your book cover behind me for a reason, because
It's beautiful.
thank you. Well,
Thank you for doing that.
but it's because it's to promote you. If you're not on this call with me, nobody's going to click on there to see my ugly mug and hear what I have to say. They're going to want to know about your book.
Mhm.
So, I know it's about the people I talk to, but what I do find that, to your point, I see some of my competition, I guess is what they would be. And, you see the dirty clothes in the background, the junk piled up. And I'm like, that's disrespectful to the person you're talking to. That's just not very cool at all, in my opinion. That, try to be professional, at least in something. And so, my whole angle is I'm a fan, and I want to,
Mhm.
if I'm talking to a journalist, you're telling me about somebody I'm interested in. So I want to know. So I'm a fan talking to a journalist that tells me about people I want to know. That
Mhm.
said, I think there's a lot of your peers in your part of this equation in the publishing industry and all that who don't have ethics, who don't do the right kind of research that they were, I would assume, trained to do, because there's so much in the way of plagiarism. There's so much in the way of skewing of the interview, editing it to convey a certain angle and such. And I think that's horrific and a disrespectful approach to the artist. Put it out there, let the chips fall where they may, and
Mhm.
let the reader decide, is the way I view of it. So thank
Yeah,
you for,
that's my opinion too. So
yeah,
I'm glad that you think. I mean, there are women in this book that I disagree with. I hope anyone reading this book actually won't be able to tell what my opinions are on these things. Um, if you can't tell what I really think, then I've done my job,
there you go. There
basically.
you go. And I think that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. If I do a review on something, I don't say you're going to hate this, you're going to like it. I don't say, if you like, I don't review polka, but if you like polka music, you're going to love this album. I don't like polka, so that's, I'm not going to say this sucks because it's polka, but the point being is, who are we to say this is what you should like? I just like what you've done. Present the facts. And you're right. I didn't see what your bent was on any of those articles or any of those chapters in there. So, a fantastic book. I've got to ask you, what you've been asked a million times already, I'm sure. What's next? What is there a sequel? Is there going to be a different? Is it going to be just about the impact of gender, like you were saying early in the conversation? What's on the radar?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I briefly considered doing a sequel to this, but I've decided not to, because I really feel that I've captured this about as well as can be. And also I wanted to do something radically different this next time. So I signed a book deal earlier this year to help Eugene Hoots of Gogol Bordello write his memoir.
Oh,
And so for anyone who isn't familiar with Gogol Bordello, they're a gypsy punk band. They blend traditional Roma music with punk rock, and it's phenomenal. It's really great. And Eugene is a fascinating character because he was born and raised in Soviet Ukraine.
wow.
And
Apropos. Yeah.
and lived through Chernobyl. His father was very anti-Soviet, kept getting interrogated by the KGB, scary. You didn't know if he was going to disappear one day and just never come back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really fascinating, if bleak sometimes, story. And then eventually his family was granted refugee status, and they spent some time bouncing around Europe before finally being granted asylum here in America. And he came to America not knowing English, with no money, and somehow built his way up to being, a rock star who now has 600,000 followers on Facebook, and a movie star. He was in the critically acclaimed film Everything Is Eliminated, among others. He's just a real inspiration and just a fascinating guy. And so I've gone from interviewing 20 women to interviewing one very unusual and entertaining guy. So it's fascinating to me to write these chapters up in his voice, do the interviews with him and then write up the chapters and then he's gonna go back through and kind of finesse them, and then that should come out next year via Matt Holt Books, Ben Bella.
Oh, cool.
I don't have a publishing date just yet. We're only about halfway through the writing. So yeah, that's the next thing. And then of course I continue to do articles all the time.
Who for?
So
Where can we look for you at?
You can find me on all the usual social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I'm under Katherine Yeske Taylor, music journalist, Yeske.
Mm-hmm.
And I put up articles all the time, all different styles, rock as well as country, pop, all different things.
Where do you work out of? Are you in New York now?
I'm
or
in
still
New York City. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No.
And I do have some upcoming, I don't know when you're going to air this, but I do have some upcoming book signings.
Oh, really? Tell us about it.
Yeah. I have one in Indianapolis. It's Tomorrow Bookstore is sponsoring it, but we're actually holding it at the Indie Fringe Theater on February 20th.
Oh, okay.
You can go on Eventbrite and get tickets to that. It's cheap. They just are doing that to get some idea of how many people are coming.
Right.
So they can order enough books. So there's that on February 20th in Indianapolis. And then on March 5th, I'll be in Princeton, New Jersey at Labyrinth Books. March 21st, I'm going to be at Narberth Books in Narberth, Pennsylvania. March 27th, I will be at Head House Books in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. March 23rd, I will be at Howling Bassett Books in Oldwick, New Jersey. And then I have events coming up in Hoboken, New Jersey in early March. I'm not sure the date just yet. And then I will have a couple of dates in Connecticut in early May. So yeah, stay tuned. I'll post about all those on my social media.
Yeah, well, I'll get connected to you on my personal account, and then I also put it on the Boomerosity Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all that kind of stuff when these things post. But, with this book you have coming out next year, I think it'd be fun to have both of you on there to talk about the book.
Oh yeah, Eugene's amazing. So yeah,
please have me on your list. If you use a different publicist, give them my name again and say, hey, I want Randy on here, but I want to be able to talk to you about that book when it comes that time. But I love this one. I'm telling people about it. I think it's worth the investment, worth the time reading. You did an amazing job on it. I'm jealous because, they tell me I need to do a book sometime, but nobody's offering me a book contract. So I guess I'll do it then when that happens. So, but thank you for taking the time. I appreciate everything you've done on this, and it's been inspirational. It really has.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for being one of the people who's upholding good journalism.
Well, thank you, Katherine. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.